Well, hello there, class. I am so excited because I have a surprise for all of you. So, for our next 9 weeks, we are going to be spending doing a novel study. And I'm so excited to share with you what our novel story is going to be, or our novel unit will be. Our novel for this next 9 weeks is Flat Stanley. Flat Stanley is one of my favorite books. I remember reading it when I was your age, and in it something crazy happens to Stanley, which we might be able to guess from the cover. Take a second. Think about what you might think happened to Stanley. And he goes on all of these crazy adventures around the world. He stops crime. He is just the coolest kid. So, Flat Stanley, it's by Jeff Brown. So that is our author. So that's who wrote the book. But our pictures, or the person who illustrated it, is by Scott Nash. So they worked together to create Flat Stanley and worked together to create this story. So, I'm going to begin by reading chapter 1. And when I read, I want you to be following along with me. So that means you are opened up on the page that I am at. You have your finger or your bookmark following along as I'm reading. And I'll tell you the pages as I go. You're stopping with me. You're continuing with me. All right? And we're going to ask some really good questions while we read, all right? But this one is just for chapter 1. So I am on page 1, chapter 1, the big bulletin board. Before I even start reading, good readers, we always ask questions, right? So already when I read that title, the big bulletin board, thinking, why did the author name this chapter the big bulletin board? I need to think on it for a little bit. I'm also wondering, who is this character and why does he seem to be yelling? I don't know. So I'm going to go ahead and read the chapter. Again, you are following along with me. So page number 1. I'm going to wait until you get there. Alrighty. Breakfast was ready. I will go wake up the boys, Miss Lambchop said to her husband, George Lambchop. Just then, their younger son, Arthur, called from the bedroom he shared with his brother, Stanley. Hey! Come and look! Hey! Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop were both very much in favor of politeness and careful speech. Hay is for horses, Arthur, not people, Mr. Lambchop said as they entered the bedroom. Try to remember that. Excuse me, Arthur said, but look! He pointed to Stanley's bed. Across it lay the enormous bulletin board that Mr. Lambchop had given the boys a Christmas ago so that they could pin up pictures and messages and maps. It had fallen during the night on top of Stanley. But Stanley was not hurt. In fact, he would still have been sleeping if he had not been woken up by his brother's shout. What's going on here? He called out cheerfully from beneath the enormous board. That was page 2. Look at the picture. Okay, so we already know that this little boy in the pajamas, that's Arthur. We know that this is Mrs. Lambchop and Mr. Lambchop. And here is who? Right, Stanley. But Stanley had been flattened by the big, enormous bulletin board. Wait a second, that was our chapter title. So we know why it's named that. It's named that because that's what fell on top of Stanley and made him flat. Oh my goodness. Okay, turn the page to chapter 4 and follow along with me. Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop hurried to lift it from the bed. Heavens, said Mrs. Lambchop. Gosh, said Arthur, Stanley's flat. As a pancake, said Mr. Lambchop. Darndest thing I've ever seen. Let's all have breakfast, Mrs. Lambchop said. Then Stanley and I will go see Dr. Dan and hear what he has to say. In his office, Dr. Dan examined Stanley all over. How do you feel? He asked. Does it hurt very much? I felt sort of tickly for a while after I got up, Stanley Lambchop said, but I feel fine now. So there he is at the doctor's. I wonder if the doctor's going to help him at all. Or maybe they'll prescribe some medicine? I don't know. Let's see. Well, that's mostly how it is with these cases, said Dr. Dan. I'm on top of page 6, the following page. We'll just have to keep an eye on this young fellow, he said when he had finished the examination. Sometimes we doctors, despite all our years of training and experience, can only marvel at how little we really know. Mrs. Lambchop said that she thought Stanley's clothes would have to be altered by the tailor. Now, so Dr. Dan told his nurse to take Stanley's measurements. Mrs. Lambchop wrote them down. Stanley was 4 feet tall, about a foot wide, and half an inch thick. Does anybody know what a tailor is? Sounds like a job. Sounds like it's something somebody does, but I'm not for sure. We'll have to search what a tailor is. Okay, we're going to leave it right there for the end of chapter 1. Now, I bet you all have lots of questions, right? Is Stanley going to be okay? Will he ever get big again? Can this really happen in real life? What kind of adventures will Stanley go on? Right? Lots of really good questions. You might have different ones from me. So I want you to think on those questions and see what those answers might be as we read through the story.